speaking of points, it came out the other day that Black Friday and that weekend was 19% more. People spent 19% more this year than last year. But last year was a transit strike, happened just around this point. Is this sort of like fudging the numbers a little bit?
Well, numbers are always subject to regional. Certainly the transit strike just affected the New York market or the retail marketplace. There's certainly a broad nation and broad statistics on retail sales. So yeah, I mean, numbers are always skewed. I mean, whenever we look at numbers, and that's why we talked about this uncertainty just a moment ago. We try to look at all the data and draw conclusions, but sometimes the conclusions aren't obvious, even to those very, very smart people, quote, in the know, whoever they happen to be.
Okay, the blue state types are going to take over Congress and the Senate. The red staters are going to have to take a back seat for at least a couple of years anyway, 4 years. How will that affect the Democrats taking over the House and Senate? How will that affect the market? What do you expect to happen? Because this is after 8 years, there's going to be a transition now.
No question. You know, it's interesting. If you look back through history and look at the market and see how it behaves, we have had some of the most successful market moves during periods when the president and the Congress were on opposite sides of the aisle. Witness Ronald Reagan's tenure. Almost the whole time he was dealing with a Democratic Congress. Witness Clinton's time when he was dealing in the latter, I think, 6 years of his tenure as president, he was dealing with a Republican Congress. Yet if you look at that period, it was one of the most vibrant periods in the stock market's history. So there are those who talk about gridlock and issues such as that being good for the market. So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I'm not concerned about. I think the market is going to react to the economic environment of the nation as a whole. I don't think the market's going to react to changes in our political makeup.
Well, the Democratic Congress and Senate, when Ronald Reagan was president, they weren't out to get Reagan. I mean, he was a popular guy, kind of popular guy. He was a nice guy, the jelly bean guy and all that. George Bush is not a popular guy. The Democrats will be out to try to, you know, the Iraq War and all that. He's not nearly as popular. Reagan had a high popularity. He remained in office. If this were George Bush's first term, I don't know that he'd get a second term at this point. How does that plug into this notion?
Well, again, I don't think it affects, because I think if you look at the end of Clinton's year, he was very popular with the public, but he wasn't so popular with the Republicans. And I think they even tried to impeach him, if we recall.
Yeah, a couple of times anyway.
Right?
Yeah.
So, again, I don't see that. Yes, you're absolutely right of your assessment of George Bush and his popularity and the Democrats, but I still don't think it's going to change what the market's going to. There are certainly going to be sectors. For example, if we look at healthcare and prescription drugs and the things that Congress, the Democratic Congress, would like to do, it certainly has an impact on that sector, on the large pharmaceuticals, major impact on that. So there will be sectors where your question would say, yes, there's going to be effect. But as far as the market as a whole, I'm not seeing that it's going to take us off base.
And the next administration, be it Republican or Democrat, how will that affect one way or another? I mean, first Democrat, Hillary Clinton, let's say.
Yeah, I mean,
Clinton.
It's certainly a possibility.
Okay. It looks like we're going to have to, we're kind of running out on...
No, okay, I'm just telling you to speed up this particular section so we can move on.
Okay, so, okay, I'm such a nosy guy.
You're having a lot of fun.
Ooh, oh, great time. One more question, then we're going to move along. War economy, when I was growing up as a teenager, war economy, war is good. War is good, you know, the industries are working, everybody's getting overtime. Not so this time, is that correct? I mean, the war economy does that apply now?
Yeah, I think every economic cycle is different. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that in the initial stages of this war, I think we saw the market react and the economy react. And we did go into a pretty strong cycle of expansion. If you look back over the past 6 or 7 quarters, or 8 quarters since the war began, unfortunately it's been that long or even longer. So we did see an initial expansion, but now this war, like this market rally, is getting a little long in the tooth, as they would say. So, yeah, it could be a little different from here on in as far as assessing the war's effect on the economy.
Okay, we're just getting into this conversation. We're running a little bit long, so we're going to have to move along to our next, where we go from here. And again, you're listening to Visions, a series of visits. Your host and fellow traveler, Herb Mosman. We're on the floor. We're in the Blue Room.
We're in the big room now, the main room.
The main room, the big room, we're with Edward, not Edward Purpura. Stephen Purpura. I knew an Ed Purpura, so I wanted to call you Ed Purpura. We are spending the day. It's December 1st, 2006. We're at New York Stock Exchange, and thank you, Martha. She just took the bag off my shoulder, so I'm a little off. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move along, and here's Mr. Purpura, number 664. Such a deal.
Such a deal. So, why don't I tell you a little bit about the actual functionings of the New York Stock Exchange and where we are?
Let's cut. Okay, we're back on. And what were you doing just now? What happened there?
Well, I just executed a trade. I got a customer order to purchase 20,000 shares of a stock, and I just walked in, which is it's good that we ask about this now. I'll tell you a little bit about the auction market and our price discovery system here at the New York Stock Exchange.
And how long did that take?
Well, I'm in the process of executing that order as you and I speak. I left it in the hands of the specialist and gave him instructions to work. So that order is being worked as we speak, and I am monitoring its progress on my handheld computer.
You've got a computer wrapped around, tied around your neck, a strap, and your what? Okay, so back to work.
Okay, so back to work. Let me give you a little just background quickly. We're standing in the middle of the big room or main room or ballroom, whatever you choose to call it. This room dates back to the 1800s. This is the first space that the New York Stock Exchange walked into. This was it. The garage opened up in 1928, signaling a market top. The next room to open up was the blue room, opened up in 1968. 1968 was a key time in history. The market had moved up dramatically through the late 60s. In 1968, the Dow Jones Industrial Average touched 1,000 for the first time. They opened the blue room in that year.
What month in 68?
It was in the summer of 1968. I'm going to guess August, but I think it could be later than that.
My daughter was born June 6, 1968.
Well, it was probably right near there.
There you go.
But anyway, it was very interesting because when that blue room was open, that was also sort of a market top, because the market touched 1,000. The Dow Jones Industrial Average touched 1,000 in 1968 and never went any higher for the ensuing 14 years until 1982. That's how long it took.
You just got a signal and you're doing something on your handheld.
Yeah, I'm just entering the next portion of this order and giving the specialist instructions so it can work while we're talking.
This is actually happening, folks. We're not making it up.
Then, I'm just telling you a little bit about the space. Then in 1987, once again at a market top, right before the crash, they opened the expanded blue room, which was the fourth room. And then the last room to open was 30 Broad in the new room that you referred to, which opened up in, I think, January of 2000, also a market top. We're thinking of closing that. That's a different issue. But for a broker like myself, the floor of the exchange is roughly the size of a football field. And during the day, as a floor broker, I could move all over the floor executing orders. I would walk an average of 15 to 20 miles in a day. So you may see, if you walk around, you'll see floor brokers. Our shoes and our feet are very, very important. We all have our own way of keeping our feet healthy. So that's how we make our living, moving around.
One point on the garage, horses and carriages used to come into the garage. When the car came about, what happened? Did the garage stay open for automobiles?
Well, actually, since the garage opened in 1929, that was really so the transition from horse carriages to automobiles was just coming on, so it was well timed.
So the garage opened the same year as the crash?
That's exactly right.
Before or after?
That's exactly right. It was before. It was before the crash. It was open. So, and again, my own little piece of trivia is that the New York Stock Exchange historically has, and it makes sense that it opens up at market tops because volume expands, activity expands. Gee, we need more space. By the time the space opens, it's a market top. So one might then choose to draw a conclusion about decreasing space, as we will be very soon when we eliminate 30 Broad Street. I'm not making any predictions. I'm just tossing out the concept.
Okay, so 1968, December of 1968, you went to 1,000. You topped 1,000 for the first time. As we sit here right now at 10:12, 10:12 and 10 seconds, as you continue to update your order and get information on your order. The question being at 10:12:15, what is the number now? What is the Dow at now?
Well, I mean, the Dow Jones Industrial Average now is at 12,182. Where's it going? You and I could debate that for a long time. That's, again, getting back to the other issues that you're talking about. But this is right near an all-time high for the Dow, as we all know. So the market's been acting very, very well of late. Very
In
well.
1939, you topped 1,000. I mean, 39 years ago, basically, you topped 1,000, and today you're at 12,100 something.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because in 1968, market touched, the Dow Jones Industrial Average touched 1,000. It then proceeded to go nowhere for 14 years until 1982 when it broke through 1,000. And from 1982 until 2000, it went to 10,000. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting to see a dramatic move in the market. So it shows you what can happen given the right set of circumstances.
And just a couple of months earlier, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. He probably would have been the president.
Could well have been.
And my daughter was born the day he died, June 6th. How did that affect without going, I mean, I don't know if you were here, but did that affect your Dow?
You're talking about the
Robert Kennedy.
His assassination had an effect?
He went to 1,000 a couple of months later.
That's a good question. I actually was in college at that period when he was shot. I remember it well. And I don't actually recall what the market did, but I think if you look historically, for example, on the day that JFK was shot, the market got hammered and I think actually closed early. The next day it bounced right back when people realized, you know what, the nation is going to go on, whether it's JFK or Lyndon Johnson, which refers back to what I said to you earlier about politics and the market. Can we just walk back in? I want to update that order.
You were in college and I was at Coney Island Hospital. So, waiting for my daughter's birth.
Wow, that's
Kimberly
exciting.
Beth Ann. Hi, Kimberly. Okay, we're moving along. We're going to cut tape?
Yeah, because
Okay, we're back on. I think we were just finishing up the point about JFK and how it changed and that sort of thing. So let's move along.
Okay, let's get back to the auction market. And why don't we walk into the other room? I mentioned a little bit about what I do as a floor broker. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the auction market that I operate in and what the functions of the specialist might be. No matter where you trade on the floor, the arrangement is exactly the same. Prices are discovered, what we call price discovery, via the auction market. The auction market being, I as a floor broker will walk in to the location that a stock is traded. At that location will be the specialist, who is the person who is handling that, has a responsibility for organizing trading and keeping it orderly. The specialist's job does that, and I will interact with him in order to execute my order and find the correct price for my stock. In 1977, I would do that verbally. Today, I do it verbally and electronically. I've got to take this, I got another order.
Okay, right on time because I'm just going to, we're going to stop tape and switch, turn the tape over. Let's stop tape. We're back on tape. I've turned the tape over and we're ready to go back to work, sir.
So getting back to the auction market was very, very important. The auction market at the New York Stock Exchange, the concept is bringing all orders to one place, whether they're delivered by a broker such as myself, a floor broker, or whether they're delivered electronically. The concept of the auction market is concentrate all the orders in one place, therefore all participants at that moment have the chance to interact and, by theory, come up with a quote, best price or best price discovery. And that's how we work this particular marketplace. And I, as a floor broker, today, as we're making this transition into the hybrid market system, I have the option of executing the order verbally, the way we used to walking in, or executing it electronically. I also have the option of standing in the big room and executing an order here in the expanded blue room by electronically sending the order to the specialist post and either allowing him to use discretion to execute the order, the specialist, or to put limitations on it that I choose. So actually, the hybrid market system and the electronics, this handheld computer makes me as a floor broker incredibly more productive than I were.
Mobile, of course.
What's that?
You're mobile.
Yes, well, we've always been mobile, but the issue is I can execute orders in multiple places where before I had this handheld computer, I had to physically move from place to place.
Is the auction area sort of like the heartbeat where it all that's the central location, all filters into that space?
For each individual stock. So for example, IBM, which is traded right there at that post, every order, every floor broker who has an interest in IBM will come to that location and therefore have the chance to interact.
Okay, so we're looking over here, these people working here, it's sort of like a circular desk and people behind there with the green jackets on. And what, is this a company there?
Yes, this particular specialist unit is called Spear Leads. It's owned by Goldman Sachs. There are currently seven specialist firms on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
And each one has a
location. They tend to put all their stocks together. The only reason, there's no rhyme or reason. A lot of people ask, are stocks placed on the floor of the exchange, for example, oil stocks? Not at all. The only criteria of placing stocks is what specialist firm has the ability to trade that particular stock or the responsibility to trade it.
Is there a quiet? I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
What's your question?
Okay. Is there a quiet space here? I mean, somewhere where nothing's happening?
Well, today's a pretty quiet day, but no, if you want quiet space, you have to actually go off the floor because things get pretty noisy here.
And I interrupted you. Can you get back to where you were?
I think we were talking a little bit about the responsibilities of the specialists. I was starting to tell you that today there are 7 major specialist firms. When I came down here in 1977, there were over 60 specialist firms. At that time, many of the specialist firms were family-owned businesses, sometimes traded only 5 or 10 stocks. But as volatility and volume increased over the years, specialist firms needed more capital. So at first they would begin to just merge, and then in later years they were purchased by banks, in the case of Bank America, and Goldman Sachs purchasing Spear Leeds, and other specialist firms chose to go public, in the case of Vandermeulen and in the case of LaBranche. So today we have only 7 specialist firms. Most of them are either public organizations or owned by banks or brokerage firms.
Is there a film that deals with Wall Street that you think is true to form, or do you get a laugh out of trading places? You know,
trading places?
What happened there?
With the commodities trade.
Yeah,
commodities.
Yeah, that was commodities trade. That was interesting. I mean,
does that happen? Yeah, it was.
Oh yeah, a lot of the things that were depicted there are relatively accurate, but you know, it's like anything in Hollywood. They tend to overstate things. It'd be very interesting. I always felt
they got to fill the screen.
Yeah, I always felt that someday, years after I retire, I'll write a sitcom about minute little goings on the floor of the exchange, which were very, very interesting. And it's a very good place for to watch human interaction and people's reaction to things like fear and greed and
avarice and all that good stuff.
All those things. It's a very, very interesting thing because as a floor broker, excuse me, I'm just going to enter
all
an
those
order.
Things that make the world go round.
It's very interesting working down here, and it has been for me over the years, because you actually get to see people who are dealing with vast amounts of money making instantaneous decisions standing on their feet. And it's very exciting to watch and interesting to watch people's personalities, how they react to situations, how they react to pressure. It's very interesting.
Speaking of pressure, I get the feeling we're kind of running a little bit late right now. I've been a little more inquisitive than I might have been. I know that Mertha said something about 10:20 would be a good cutoff time. We may be running late, so Mertha, whenever you're ready to shut us down, that's fine.
Definitely.
And where do we want to go from here? Anything we want to do now?
Well, we can talk a little bit about what the future of the exchange has.
Go for it.
And again, the exchange, before we went public, was made up of 1,366 memberships. 1,366. Some people called them seats, even though, as you well see, there are not many seats.
Sitting.
There's nobody sitting down here. There's not many seats, which is interesting when you.
Couple guys leaning, but nobody's sitting.
Yeah, one of the nice things about working on the floor of the exchange that I will miss whenever I cease being a member of the exchange is the ability to be on your feet, be active, physically active all day long, and to also be mentally active. It's a very, very interesting combination. And when people first come to the floor, they're usually exhausted. Just standing on your feet for a full trading day is exhausting to most people because most people are used to sitting at desks and the like.
And of course, you're buying the seat. These seats are purchased. You can lose your seat as well.
Yes, well, of course, there are no more seats now. We're now a public company.
Seats, yeah, right.
Yeah, but we, as far as the membership goes, when we went public earlier this year, that ceased being the old seat membership of the New York Stock Exchange, and everyone became stockholders.
Old retired cops, when they retired, they wind up hanging out the station house with the guys and all that. Do retired Wall Streeters do that?
Yes, actually, it's very interesting that you mention that because over the years, of course, members retire normally, even before we were a public company. They would retire. We have a club called the Buttonwood Club, which actually
is a bleeding already.
So actually, this little tree that you have here is a Buttonwood Club. What that is, when you're a member of the exchange for 25 years, you're eligible to join the Buttonwood Club, and you can be admitted into that club, and they have a dinner once a year, and all the old members come back. And they all get together. We have a little reception on the floor of the exchange. So yes, they all do congregate, and people who work here on the floor of the exchange, when they leave, I think they miss it. It's a very unique place to be, unique relationships, and people who work together and are competitors. There's a very, very strong bond between them.
Are you going to miss being here when that day comes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've enjoyed my tenure here at the exchange. I've felt very fortunate to have had the opportunity to spend a large part of my career down here. It's been very educational and informative to me. And part of it is having the opportunity to do what we're doing right now.
You're great.
It's to share knowledge of the exchange with people outside, and maybe have them have a little bit better understanding of what we do here and what our markets do.
Well, you're great, and I guess we should shut tape. I'm kind of assuming we have to stop.
No, do you?
But okay. You know.
No, we have a couple more minutes, as long as we don't impose. So like.
Okay, so we do have a couple of more minutes. So wherever else we're going to go and go for it.
Well, again, let's get back to where's the exchange going. There's tremendous debate as to what will happen to the floor as we see it right now, where you're standing, what will happen once the electronic or hybrid market system is fully implemented. And right now, the full hybrid market is in what we call a pilot stage, where only certain stocks are on the full hybrid system.
Right.
And go ahead.
You have had a huge change here in the last few months. That your first woman president would be correct?
Oh no, that position was given to Catherine Kenney in 2001.
Right.
Oh, 2001.
Yes.
So she's been. What is her title?
I think she's
co-president of the exchange. Yes.
And she's the first.
Yes.
She's the first. So that's a major change. That's moving into the new millennium and all that. At the new millennium, 2001. So that's a change. That things are evolving, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think you have to go back. If you look at women's impact on the floor of the exchange, you have to go back well before that. Women have been very successful on the floor of the exchange, and I actually can remember the first woman to get her job on the floor of the. There used to be a show on TV called "What's My Line." You may remember it.
Sure.
And I remember the first
John
lady.
Daly.
Yes.
John Daly.
I think that was his name. The first lady, whose name was Judy, I forget her last name. She came down here as a runner, I believe in the 60s. And I remember she was on What's My Line as the first woman to work on the floor of the exchange. And if you look now around, you'll see there are many, many women who work on the floor of the exchange. And women have flourished both as clerks and members and supervisors and administrative people on the floor of the exchange, as Martha's doing. So women's impact in our industry and on the floor of the exchange certainly dates back beyond Catherine Kenney's appointment as president of the exchange. Sometimes the conclusions aren't obvious, even to those very, very smart people, quote, in the know, whoever they happen to be.
Okay, the blue state types are going to take over Congress and the Senate. The red staters are going to have to take a back seat for at least a couple of years anyway, 4 years. How will that affect the Democrats taking over the House and Senate? How will that affect the market? What do you expect to happen? Because this is after 8 years, there's going to be a transition now.
No question. You know, it's interesting. If you look back through history and look at the market and see how it behaves, we have had some of the most successful market moves during periods when the president and the
Speaking of points, it came out the other day that Black Friday and that weekend was 19% more. People spent 19% more this year than last year. But last year was a transit strike, happened just around this point. Is this sort of like fudging the numbers a little bit?
Well, numbers are always subject to regional. Certainly the transit strike just affected the New York market or the retail marketplace. There's certainly a broad nation and broad statistics on retail sales. So yeah, I mean, numbers are always skewed. I mean, whenever we look at numbers, and that's why we talked about this uncertainty just a moment ago. We try to look at all the data and draw conclusions, but
when Ronald Reagan was president, they weren't out to get Reagan. I mean, he was a popular guy, kind of popular guy. He was a nice guy, the jelly bean guy and all that. George Bush is not a popular guy. The Democrats will be out to try to, the Iraq War and all that. He's not nearly as popular. Reagan had a high popularity. He remained in office. if this were George Bush's first term, I don't know that he'd get a second term at this point. How does that plug into this notion?
Well, again, I don't think it affects, because I think if you look at Clinton's, the end of Clinton's year, he was very popular with the public, but he wasn't so popular with the Republicans. And I think they even tried to impeach him, if we recall.
Yeah, a couple of times anyway.
Right?
Yeah.
So, again, I don't see that. Yes, you're absolutely right of your assessment of George Bush and his popularity and the Democrats, but I still don't think it's going to change what the market's going to. There are certainly going to be sectors. For example, if we look at healthcare and prescription drugs and the things that Congress, the Democratic Congress, would like to do, it certainly has an impact on that sector, on the large pharmaceuticals, major impact on that. So there will be sectors where your question would say, yes, there's going to be effect. But as far as the market as a whole, I'm not seeing that it's going to. Congress were on opposite sides of the aisle. Witness Ronald Reagan's tenure. Almost the whole time he was dealing with a Democratic Congress. Witness Clinton's time when he was dealing in the latter, I think, 6 years of his tenure as president, he was dealing with a Republican Congress. Yet if you look at that period, it was one of the most vibrant periods in the stock market's history. So there are those who talk about gridlock and issues such as that being good for the market. So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I'm not concerned about. I think the market is going to react to the economic environment of the nation as a whole. I don't think the market's going to react to changes in our political makeup.
Well, the Democratic Congress